So, hello, this is Deborah Arca with Pathos, and we are delighted to have Tim Stafford here with us today. Tim is the author of a new book that we're featuring in the book club called Miracles, and the subtitle is A Journalist Looks at Modern-Day Experiences of God's Power. Tim Stafford is a senior writer for Christianity Today and a longtime journalist, 20 published books, two of which have won gold medallion awards. And you live in California, where you are coming to us live via Skype. So good morning, Tim. Thank you for being with us today.
Glad to be with you.
So we'll be featuring your book Miracles in the book club for the next 2 weeks. And I would just like to start off by asking, as a lifelong journalist, what was it about miracles, or why did you decide to write this book about miracles now?
Well, I think for two reasons, I guess. One is that, people have questions about miracles, and I have questions about miracles. I've had them all my life. Also, I think miracles get at, the topic of miracles and our experience of miracles gets at some of the bigger questions about what's going on in the universe. I mean, where is God? Is he active? Does he make a difference in the practical details of life? Can we coexist with science and faith that believes in miracles at the same time? Those kinds of questions, I think, when you start talking about miracles, you get to those pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. And so as a journalist, then, who finds evidence and stories and research very important to your work, as you've written this book about miracles, where did you come out? Would you say, from your research doing this book, can you say that miracles really do happen? Do you believe in modern miracles today?
Yeah, I definitely believe in modern miracles today. I do think they're rare, and I think that's one of the things that confuses people, that it's kind of in people's mindset sort of an all or nothing thing. Either miracles should happen every time I pray for a parking space, or I ask God to heal my aunt from cancer, or there would be no miracles. It would be impossible. And one of the things that was very interesting to me is I just started asking people, have you ever experienced a miracle? And it's an interesting thing. I'd recommend people try it. Mm-hmm. You'll find, I think, at least what I found, was that a lot of people have experienced a miracle, although maybe only one or two in their whole life. Something that they would definitely hold out as a miracle. Mm. And when you listen to them, now, not everybody, but maybe a third of the people I would talk to would say that. And then I'd say, well, tell me about it. And they would describe the miracle, and I would say, well, if that's what you experienced, if you're telling me, an accurate account, I guess I'd have to call that a miracle too. Mm-hmm. It sounds like something that doesn't happen every day. It's really beyond our normal experience.
Right. So that's one of the things that was interesting about your book, is that as you went around and researched and tried to find evidence of these miracles, you weren't necessarily satisfied in evidence, and you ultimately came to rely on the experience with this person and their story that they told you, and that seemed to be enough evidence for you. How and why was that enough for you?
Well, I think you have to think about what kind of evidence you're looking for, and I think miracles get mixed up with that thing called scientific positivism. Mm-hmm. And it's actually, believers use it the same way non-believers do. They look at miracles as proof that God exists. And so they're sort of looking for some sort of scientific demonstration of God's involvement in the world. That's actually not correctly a biblical way to think about miracles. Mm-hmm. I mean, God is always, according to Christian faith, involved in the world at every point and at every instant. A miracle is not a sign that God's there or God isn't there. A miracle is a sign that God's telling us something. Mm-hmm. He's drawing our attention to something different. And so that's one thing. You have to get out of that scientific positivism mindset to think well about miracles. The second thing is you realize that the kind of evidence that really would work with miracles is is not scientific proof. It's witness, testimony. And it's the same, because they're historical events that are not replicable. They happen once, they don't necessarily happen again or happen on certain conditions if we did the right things at the right time or prayed the right prayer or felt the right things at the right moment. They're things that God does on His timing and in His way. And what we have is the kind of evidence that you find in the law courts, or that you find when you're doing historical reviews, when historians try to establish what Napoleon said on a certain date. They're relying on testimony, and that's all they have really to go on. When you are trying a case in court, oftentimes it comes down to testimony, not forensic proof. But yet we do use that testimony not as absolute ironclad proof of anything, generally, but strong enough evidence that we trust it. We know that it's reliable.
So of all the miracles that you, or healings that you kind of researched during the course of writing this book, was there one that really stuck out to you, or stood out to you as one that you just, at the end of the day, could not count as anything other than a miracle?
Well, yeah, the kind of the one I start the book with, actually, because it sort of started my research, and this is a guy named Jeff Moore, young 20-something guy in my church, and it's not a spectacular miracle in the sense that he was dying, but he had terrible foot problems, such that from the time he was about 16, he wasn't able to walk. And I used to watch him rolled into church every Sunday on a wheelchair. I didn't know Jeff at that point, but I saw him. Everybody saw him. You don't see too many 16-year-old kids who look to be in decent health in a wheelchair. And, I saw that for years. And then one Sunday, his mom, who's in the choir, said, I have, something to say. And Pastor recognized her, and she said Jeff was healed. And it was, that was an interesting case for our church, because my church is not a charismatic or Pentecostal church, it's a Presbyterian church. In principle, most people probably believe miracles are possible, but in practice, we don't experience them all the time.
Right.
And so, people had varied reactions to that notice. But then when I started really thinking about miracles, I thought, I need to find out what really happened. And I didn't know. I just knew that it had been said that he was healed. So I went and talked to Jeff, and he got the whole story. And so just to keep it brief, it's kind of an involved story, but basically he had these foot problems that he'd had 5 surgeries. Said he had a jar full of screws that had been taken out of his feet. Doctors had done everything. He'd been taken into Stafford Hospital, the best authorities on foot problems in the world, looked at his feet and just basically said, we don't know how to help you. It's you're going to have to live with this. It's just too bad, but it's nothing we can do. And so he had resigned himself to spending the rest of his life in a wheelchair as a 20-year-old kid. And then he joined this wheelchair basketball team, and he really liked that because they were. Jeff's a very active, normal kind of kid, and they were smacking into each other, knocking each other over. He thought that was really cool. And they played this basketball tournament up in Reading, which is 4 hours drive from here. And this one guy, and they had to stay overnight, and then the next day one of his friends said, let's go to this church I know. So they went to this church, Pentecostal church. They prayed for him. He was expecting nothing. They said, stand up. He stood up. He said, I could always stand up. That wasn't a big deal. It just would start hurting bad if I kept standing up. But he didn't feel anything, so they thought, well, maybe something's happened. They said, do something that would really hurt. So he got up on the stage, and he jumped off. And he said it would have just been completely excruciating pain the last years. And there was nothing. His feet were fine. And he walked out of that church that day, and he has never felt pain in his feet again. I call that a miracle. It was, what else can you call it? There was instantaneous healing. It was at prayer, at someone's prayer that seemed to instigate the healing. It was terrible pain to no pain. in an instant. That was pretty impressive to me.
Right.
And talking to Jeff was really interesting too, because he's a totally laid back, kind of border kind of kid who just is not interested in telling you about the past. He's just interested in what's happening now.
And not high drama, not...
No drama at all.
Yeah.
And you could tell he wasn't the kind of kid at all who was working himself up to, great acts of faith. And in fact, he had no faith. He just walked in there because his friend asked him to go in, and his friend was in a wheelchair too. He's a paraplegic. He's still a paraplegic. He wasn't healed. Yeah. But Jeff was.
So that's a great story, and that is the story that opens your book, and then you go on to talk about a lot of responses to that Pentecostal movement. You kind of trace some of the movements in church history that have been more open to miracles, as well as the Old Testament and New Testament stories of healings. And then you have a chapter that you devote to, can the scientists believe in miracles, which I'd recommend for anyone. And I'd love to ask you more questions about that, but that would probably take us in a whole other conversation. So I think I'll just end with, the one question that probably burns for everyone when they enter this conversation or begin talking about miracles or healings. And that is, why do some people get healed and others don't? The woman with cancer who prays and prays and prays and isn't healed, and yet others experiencing these great acts of healing. What at the kind of, ultimately do you say to those folks who with that question?
Yeah, it's a very hard thing, and I think everybody who deals with it pastorally would have to acknowledge it's very difficult. But this is what I think is at least somewhat helpful, is to understand miracles as signs. And that's the word that the New Testament uses for them. It actually doesn't use the word miracles. It uses the word signs. And so what is a sign? A sign is not something that points to itself. In fact, I say in the book, there are two times in my life when signs are really meaningful to me. One is when I've been on a long trip and I'm coming home and I see a sign. There's a sign I always look at right across the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm coming home on a long trip and I see Santa Rosa, 47 miles, and I know, I'm getting close to home. That means something. That's really significant. The other times when I'm lost, and I'm frustrated, I don't know where I am, I can't figure out where to go. Maybe I'm even a little scared that I'm in the wrong neighborhood or something. And then I see a sign, and I see the sign, I know where I am, I know where I'm going. And that's a great relief. But I have never come home from either of those experiences and said, let me tell you about the sign I saw. The sign serves a function to point me home, but in itself, it isn't that significant. It's crucial to get me home, but the attention is on what the sign's pointing to. And I think that's the way God uses signs. They're pointing to the kingdom of heaven. They're not the kingdom of heaven. They're representing what is still to come. So I think what is hard when you're suffering, but is still what we're called to do, is to really appreciate not that God is promising healing for every person on this planet now and in this moment, but that healing is coming as the kingdom of God comes. And when we see miracles, which are rare, they just don't happen all the time. If they did happen all the time, we wouldn't call them miracles. But they do happen, and they are happening to point us to something. And so the person who doesn't get the answer to their prayers, that isn't healed, I think is going to be disappointed. There's a lot of suffering in this world and in this life, and they're experiencing it. But at least the existence of miracles, the knowledge that there are miracles that do happen, can point them toward the fact that they will be healed. That healing will come. There goes my phone.
That's okay.
Sorry about that. Sorry.
That's okay.
No,
right.
I thought I had it turned off. So anyway, I just say it, pointing them home, and so that miracles point us home, and they're not on signs are not on every street every 3 feet.
Right.
They're only at the crucial points where we need to see them.
Right. Well, thank you. This has been a great conversation, and there's much more to dive into in your book. So I hope that those of you watching us will get a copy of Tim's new book, Miracles. A journalist looks at modern-day experiences of God's power, and determine for yourself what you think about modern-day miracles. And then if you can, join us next, the last week of this month, we'll be having a live chat with Tim. And I think that's going to be happening on Wednesday, July 25th. But come back to the book club for more information on that. I think it'll be happening around midday. You can come with your questions for Tim. You can come and share your experiences, your own experiences of modern-day miracles or stories you've heard from other folks. And we'll have a lively discussion on miracles at the end of the month. So thank you so much, Tim. And blessings on your day, and thanks for taking the time to join us today at the book club.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.